Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, Gene.
We're going to call to order the meeting of December 16th for the Planning and Zoning Commission. Roll call. I'm sorry.
Mr. Snyder,
Here.
Mr. Wood,
Here.
Ms. Carr,
Here.
Mr. Forholt,
Here.
Mr. Reed,
Here.
Mr. Duskolski,
Here.
Mr. Homich.
Here.
It appears that we have a super quorum on that. The third item is the election of officers.
Yes, based upon changes in the board, the former chairman was removed from the board, leaving a vacancy. Obviously, Carol's back on the board, but since that vacancy occurred, the first time of business is to elect a new chair. It's going to be a little bit redundant because first meeting of next month, we'll have election of chair and vice chair again after the new board is seated. So, but for tonight, we need official election of a chair to run the meeting tonight.
Can I make a motion for the chair? Or is
I'll move to nominate Ms. Carr.
Oh, one motion.
She's vice chair, was vice chair.
Second that.
I moved Danny Wood.
No second.
I move for Carol Truskowski.
it's all doing? Do we have a count of who said what, please?
There's no second on that one, so it's Jean or Danny.
So we vote.
Vote.
The vote.
Yep.
Let's vote.
Mr. Snyder,
Well, wait, what are we voting on? First motion, which will be Jean.
Yeah, she should be voted first.
Okay.
So I can't vote for myself.
Sure.
Oh, sure.
There's a motion to appoint Jean Carr as chairman for the meeting tonight, chairperson.
Show of hands or roll call?
Do a roll call?
whatever you prefer. Roll call?
Sure, I'm sorry.
Okay, all right. Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Mr. Wood,
Yes.
Ms. Carr,
Yes.
Mr. Forholt,
Yes.
Mr. Reed,
Yes.
Mr. Duskolski,
Yes.
Mr. Homich.
Yes.
It appears that Jean Carr is going to chair the meeting for tonight.
There you go, Gene.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
And then there will be an election next meeting, correct?
In January, yes.
Approval of the minutes of the October 21st meeting. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes, a question about that before we go.
Sure.
What's the protocol on who is allowed to vote on that? Since some of the people who are here tonight were not at that meeting. Does it matter?
And you're approving it as a board.
Okay.
And we all got the minutes. So. It appears that we have a board, correct?
We already did that, yep.
So moved.
All right, so the motion is second.
Second.
Okay, so on the minutes. Are we on consent agenda or are we
I
still?
thought it was all.
Still minutes.
Minutes were taken vote.
Minutes were all done.
Minutes were approved, okay. Under consent.
Consent agenda. Request of site plan 6 months retroactive extension, the second one. The proposed Mount Dora Christian Academy, formerly known as Christian Middle School.
This is their football soccer field complex.
Move to approve.
Approve. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Consent agenda approved?
Any unopposed?
None opposed.
Thank you very much.
New business, request for a variance. Land Development Code Section 6.6.2.4.C.3. Buffer standards to allow for relief of required screening wall located on the south side of US 441 and Spring Harbor Boulevard. EPIC Theaters applicant. May and Whitaker Family Partnership, LTD owners. Bowen and Stroh, is that correct?
Straw.
Stroh, yeah, representatives. And Kajaz,
Got Jazz.
excuse me, LCC project engineer. Project case number VAR 15-05.
Okay, before we move forward, I just want to swear in staff and any members of the public, applicant, anybody who will be speaking tonight and giving any testimony. Anyone who will be testifying, please raise your right hand. Under penalty of perjury, do you promise to tell the truth and nothing but the truth in the testimony that you'll be giving tonight?
I do.
Okay, thank you. You're sworn in.
The first applicant before you, Mark Regentine, Deputy City Manager. The first application before you is the applicant is requesting a variance, as Ms. Carr stated, to section 6.622 of the Land Development Code to allow relief for a 6-foot high screen wall requirement along the eastern property line of the property is supposed to be developed as epic theaters. I think most of you are familiar with the project. It's been before this board several times in the past. As required by the Land Development Code, a buffer type C is required when you have commercial or highest intensity commercial use, C3, adjacent to single-family residential zoning district. Part of that is a 6-foot high screen wall, a masonry wall requirement. We've included in your staff report what these particulars are. It's a 40-foot wide buffer, heavily landscaped with the screen wall to be provided. Back in October, the Planning and Zoning Commission approved the Epic Theaters project site plan, which was consistent with Land Development Code, which showed the screen wall requirement. Subsequent, the applicant has come back to seek relief from that. What we're looking at is a sort of a unique situation here where when the applicant put their application together, you have two similar but slightly differing situations. As I've outlined in my staff report, there is a FDOT retention pond that happens to be zoned residential at the southeast corner of the property. As you travel north along that eastern boundary, you have existing residential development and some undeveloped residential property to the east. To sort of synopsize the staff report, it's sort of a two-phase staff report where we have determined that for a portion of the variance, there is an argument that a hardship exists, and that is for the DOT pond. That property is a fee simple pond owned by the Florida Department of Transportation to maintain stormwater from US 441. That property will never be developed residentially. It's always going to be required for a stormwater pond. That's slightly different than the property as you travel north along that eastern property line where you have developed residential property and potential property that can be developed residentially in the future. It's currently growth, but it's zoned and has a potential for residential development. The purpose of our buffer standards are to protect property values between our commercial and our residential uses. In this case, since we have a low density residential use adjacent to a high intensity commercial uses, that's where we have our highest intensity buffer, which is the buffer that I just described to you. So that's sort of the difference that we laid out in the staff report. So the staff sees that there is an argument for a hardship on the DOT pond because that will never develop residentially adjacent to this site. We do not see a hardship on the property that is zoned residentially because as that develops, we feel that that protection is needed for those future residential units. The applicant has made the argument, and I'll turn it over to Derek or Frank here to discuss that with you. And you've certainly seen in their application that the distance in the retention pond that happens to be located there will suffice as a buffer. The intent of that of this commercial buffer is to provide some distance with the 40-foot minimum, but also provided an opaque visual buffer so the people that would be living in the future homes there wouldn't have to look out their backyard into the commercial development that would occur on the back side of those lots. So we've broken it down. I'd be happy to go over the 7 criteria that we were required to look at by the variance code with you if you'd like me to go into that detail, but that all sort of circulates around that argument. So for our recommendation, staff would recommend approval of the variance to waive the eastern screen wall requirement adjacent to the DOT pond, but denial of the variance to not construct the eastern screen wall adjacent to the residential lands and the two existing residential lots of the East Lake Gertrude Estates, which is adjacent to the parcel. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. If not, you can turn it over to the applicant to
Does
discuss his
anybody on the
case.
board have anything at this particular time? I said at this particular time. Anybody from the audience that would like to make a statement or?
Typically, we would let the applicant present their case and then open it to public hearing. So,
Hello, yes, sir. Good evening, I represent the applicant, Epic Theaters. Is that camera on for this
yes,
side?
it is. If you just lay it right on top of that logo.
Sure. I don't know how visible that is for you, but that's basically a copy of your code. I'll read from it if you can't read it from where you're at.
Pretty hard to.
Okay. And the purpose of the buffer, as Mr. Regentine noted, is to basically protect residential properties from some types of commercial uses such as noise. Your code references dirt, litter, parking lots, and to reduce adverse impacts of odor, danger from fire or explosives. Your code also references that an appropriate buffer could be, and this is from section 6.6.22, that it may include a stormwater retention area or septic tank. And the reason for that, and I'll show you one of the exhibits to our application, which is Exhibit 3 to our application. And the portion, if you can view it at issue, is right here. Staff has no objection to the southern portion. That's what they're requesting approval for. If you look at the south part, that's an FDOT pond. And so they have no objection to the granting of the variance for that part. But they do oppose our request for the north part. And what I'm trying to illustrate there is you have about 250 feet of space and a 40-foot buffer between that property line and the grove that sits there now. You have over 500 feet between the property line between the potential residential use and the actual Epic parking lot. So you have a sufficient buffer there with that retention pond that addresses your code and the practical considerations, which are noise, reduced potential adverse impacts of odor, and danger from fire or explosions. So we do meet and staff agrees, the criteria for the southern portion, but we respectfully disagree with staff and believe we also meet the criteria for the northern portion because of the buffer that will be provided there. So we would ask that you grant the variance in its entirety. We also have an illustration, Exhibit E. Thank you for enlarging that. Which shows your code requirement. The top portion shows the 40-foot landscape buffer in the wall, and the bottom portion shows what we're actually doing. You can see there it's about an 8-fold increase in the buffer requirement for the potential space of an existing building, which right now is grove and will remain grove for some time, but if that is developed, and it likely will be given its location, you're looking at over 250 feet of open space, which greatly exceeds the buffer that's required of the 40 feet. So we respectfully request that you grant the variance in its entirety, and we're available for any questions you may have. Yes, sir.
The notation's commercial building on there. Is that to scale for your building when it's done, or is that an existing building?
It's a good question. No, that's a hypothetical building because the actual site itself, there's a grove. If you look at that illustration there, the actual Epic Theater and the parking lot is about 500 feet from the eastern boundary. So that depiction you saw earlier was just a hypothetical. If that site is developed, right now it's a grove, and the site plan you approved shows it being a grove. So to answer your question, that's just a hypothetical building. Is should that grove be developed, and it'd have to come to you for that approval. We're showing where a building might exist. I'll put the other one back up so you can see it.
I guess I have a question of, And maybe it's for you, Mark. What is the purpose of the wall? Is it security, or is it sightline from the residential or potential residents? What's the purpose of the wall?
It serves a number of uses, as Derek said. He enumerated a few of those, but primarily any buffer is there to provide a pleasing visual buffer from the commercial development. And when you, like I said, when you have the most intense commercial district adjacent to a lower density residential district, that is one of the requirements. So you don't have to look out your backyard into a commercial parking lot or a site.
Yeah, because I have a little problem with the security part since it's just a partial around the property. But I talked to Vince a little bit today, and would we be acceptable at all to some berm there, or maybe a wrought iron fence or something? I'm not a big proponent of solid brick walls, and let alone a proponent of retention ponds, but I think we have to do that for code and for ordinances and for St. John's and everybody else. But how about a berm back there that might be less expensive than a brick wall and some wrought iron fence or something? I mean, I don't think this is a security issue. I think it's more of a sightline sort of thing. And I presume you're arguing because it's expensive, Derek, is that?
Well, no, we think we address what your code identifies as the problems, which are dirt, litter, reduction of odor, danger from fire, explosions. Your code also references noise and lights, where you have a 40-foot vegetation buffer, and then on top of that, another 250 feet, and on top of that, as it exists today, 250 feet of growth.
I understand that, but we have an ordinance that says you have to have a fence over there when it's next to residential property or a wall. And I'm trying to look for something a little more aesthetic than a plain wall. So, I mean, apparently you don't like that any better than you like the wall. So I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, and one thing that you remind me that I failed to mention is in the staff report. Although there's a significant difference in the distance, that area that shows as undeveloped, existing grove, can be developed commercially.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the concern is that if and when, and I have to assume it's going to be when that develops commercially, there will be a commercial building and parking lot that much closer to the residential area. And since we don't know what's going to happen there, although we're showing an existing pond, an existing approved pond there, if something would develop on this piece, there's nothing to say that pond couldn't be relocated somewhere else, allowing parking for a commercial building closer to that existing and future residential property. We just don't know, so that's why we certainly err on the side of caution and put the full buffer in.
Well, if the new building that goes in has to adjust the stormwater, which I don't think would be a logical aspect of that, you still have the grove right now. I mean, to me, the wall on the far side way would make more sense, but a vegetative buffer would do much more than a 6-foot wall. I mean, that's just. Hopefully the 6-foot wall would disappear. Hopefully, it's not the same vegetative buffer that Target has, because it's pathetic. I mean, I don't know what, we don't follow up on it or whatever, but there's dead trees, there's broken trees. That whole area is, I mean, it's got to be 6-7 years old now. And there's no canopy, nothing's there. So whoever designed it or whoever implemented it or followed up, there's nothing, I mean, between Target and the residences. And the 6-foot wall doesn't help you that much. So, I mean, I'm more concerned about the vegetative buffer. I'm sure a grove right now meets that.
And on that point, on the Target point, that is the same buffer. It's but you have to understand, if you take a close look at that buffer, the way our standard reads is in our code, that wall isn't on the property line. The majority of the buffer is on the neighboring side of the property line to provide that maximum buffer to those neighbors. So the wall is closer to the Target side, so the neighbors get the actual benefit of the buffer. That's what our code is designed. So take a close look at that. The canopy and most of the trees are on the neighboring side, on the residential side of the wall, to provide them the maximum vegetative buffer while still providing the screening to the commercial development.
So the view from the residential side is not of just a bare wall?
No, it's the majority of the landscaping is required to be on the residential side.
And would that be the case in this one too?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So Mark, you're gonna have a wall and then some landscaping behind the wall toward the residential side,
Yes.
is that correct?
That is correct.
It doesn't show up on the landscape plan that I've got in front of me.
Well, that's the fact of the code. And that's the way it would be permitted.
And I've got the wall running on the property line.
Well, these are the, there's one more step in the process, which is a construction plan